Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Gifts Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my co-host Keith Glasser. How we doing?
Great. How are you?
Got another awesome guest on tonight, so I'm going to kick it off to you for the introduction here, and then we'll get rolling.
Sure. Tonight we complete our service academy roundup of coaches, but someone I've known for a long time when he was at Holy Cross. Super excited to have him on tonight. One of, in my opinion, one of the better coaches here in college baseball, but joining his 11th year at Navy, assistant coach Jeff Kane. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate you guys having me on. Looking forward to getting after it a little bit.
It's going to be awesome. Before we get going, as always with all of our guests, give them a synopsis of how you've gotten to be at Navy.
Yeah, I fortunate enough to have the opportunity out of high school to play it at Clemson University. Late 90s, could not be more grateful for that opportunity in that place. And ultimately, like as a coach, thinking back on it in hindsight, man, I don't know if you could be around better people if you're going to get into coaching college baseball when you talk about like some of those staffs that I was fortunate to be around, even as a, and I say this very, genuinely as a very mediocre player at an elite program, but like being around Jack Leggett, being around Tim Corbin, Kevin O'Sullivan was on that staff. Mike Hampton was one of my coaches while I was there. And the list goes on and on. John Pulowski was our pitching coach my freshman year. Kevin Erminio, who's with the Guardians now, was on our staff. So, in terms of like being around guys that did it and are continuing to do it at the highest level, like that was a tremendous thing that I didn't probably realize at the time as I was going through it as a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid. Finished there, coached high school baseball in Massachusetts at Westford Academy for 4 years. Was managing in the NECBL during that time. For what is no longer, so the Lowell All-Americans back in the day. I played in the NECBL. I coached in the NECBL, and then was 5 years, at Holy Cross with Greg DeCenzo, and that was kind of a good, truthfully a good opportunity to get into Division I baseball, and not too far from the house. My dad was a Holy Cross grad. I grew up going to games up there when I was a kid, and but ultimately, when I got an opportunity to come down here to Navy, that's a pretty big opportunity. It's a tremendous place. It's a tough place to say no to for sure. So, that was obviously something that I wanted to pursue and take on. And I've been fortunate enough to be here for, going on 11 years. And my kids have grown up here. My kids have grown up around our players and around the academy. And I think that's been a really positive thing, even though they're still young, but not too young. I mean, they're getting there, 14 and 13. So, but yeah, that's kind of the quick rundown that got me here.
It's awesome. I think it's interesting the older you get and you look back, because we do have a lot of coaches who listen to this too. The people who come on who run through their career trajectory, and then you look back on the people you worked with or played for. Like you just named legends in this game. And it's funny because you don't realize it at the time when you play for them or, work for them when you're a little bit younger, that like, wow, these dudes that I'm learning from are like probably have more of an impact than they even think that they did, even on coaching, right? Like, I had it with Coach Rossi at Siena. I mean, I was with him in years 43. 44 and 45. He was another. I might have even been earlier than that. Carl at RPI was 35. And Gary Rundles at West Alabama was into the late 20s, early 30s when I coached with them. Like you learn, so those guys forget more than we know at that time about baseball. And you look back and you're like, wow, I knew nothing about. Like you get humbled quick. But like you're like, wow, like these guys actually taught me how to coach and become good at this stuff. And I think it's awesome to be able to look back and be like, I played for Jack Leggett and Corbin and O'Sullivan, but they probably taught you more about coaching than you even thought at the time, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, man. Like, I mean, in terms of like a coaching internship, man, like I don't know how much better you can get. And even coming into it, when I was at Holy Cross, like learned a ton from Greg. Um, he was able to just absolutely find ways to get stuff done, at a place that isn't funded, the way we probably would have liked it. But that was a rewarding experience. He's a guy I've kept in touch with, and he's managing in Double A with the Guardians now. I've got to spend time around some of their hitting guys and some of their teams, and that's been a cool experience. And then, I mean, truthfully, man, 9 years here, my first 9 were with Costi. That guy's got over 1,000 wins. You look back on, I guess, like retrospectively, like we were talking about this in the office. There's not many 1,000-game winners out there for sure. And like the longevity, like the continued success, never mind you look at the high end of that list, and like, I mean, Mike Martin must have averaged 50 wins a year for his entire career. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And it ain't easy winning, man. Like winning college baseball games ain't easy. So yeah, I've been super fortunate in terms of, the people I've been around and the institutions I've been able to be a part of, for sure. And that's, I haven't bounced around. I've only been at 2 spots, but I'm proud of those 2 spots, and this one certainly is a unique one and a special one. And yeah, I've been fortunate in that regard, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. But to kick us off, the first question we always ask is, how do you guys go about finding players to potentially be on the roster at the United States Naval Academy?
Yeah, I mean, I think our approach and how we go about finding guys, I don't know if it's going to be wildly different than anywhere else. I think the differences come into play as it pertains to like their understanding of what our guys do here, our guys' commitment here, what they have to do beyond graduation. The evaluation process isn't going to be a whole lot different here. We're communicating constantly with high school and travel ball coaches. We're following up on recommendations from those guys. We're watching film. We're, obviously on the road significantly. The nature of the service academy thing, I find it to be kind of interesting in the sense that just by nature, you're probably looking at a smaller pool of candidates that are willing to do what our guys do. We have to cast a pretty big net. We have to recruit coast to coast, which is, I think that's a good thing. I think obviously at a place like ours, like we want to have guys from all over the country. They're going to go, encounter that in the fleet anyways. But ultimately, we're identifying and evaluating guys the same way. The academic piece is the same as you'd probably find at other high academic institutions. That stuff has to be in place. There's not really, people may have a perception that there's a lot of wiggle room for athletes. I can tell you that, our players and the guys that we put on the field are qualified to be here. They belong here. They go through the same vetting process. They have to, go through the same process in terms of nominations and the medical and all that stuff. So, that's kind of where it whittles down. The character piece, I think, is always one that comes up, but I think, the interesting part of that is, I mean, the vast majority of guys that we recruit, like, kind of check that box. When we talk to coaches and now he's like a great guy and he does, like, we see that's every single guy on our roster. They're the guys that are willing to come to Navy, the guys that are willing to do what our guys go do, they usually check that box, which is a positive thing. But, ultimately it's evaluating and trying to find guys that, that are can help our program win, that are better than the guys that are out there now. And that's always, I think that's not a detriment to, you know, anybody in the program, but like you're always trying to be better. And like the big thing is to perform. They have to perform. So we're just evaluating guys, and truthfully, like we're not bound by, the kid doesn't have to know he wants to serve. The kid doesn't have to be like it's military or bust. I think what ends up happening, and this has been kind of more so over time, is just, you talk to them a little bit. If it's not a complete deterrent, if it's not a complete non-starter, like we'll stick with them and we'll try to educate them as best we can in terms of what our place is all about. And like the kids that get it, they recognize like the scope of the commitment and how valuable it is. When you talk about the value of a college degree, like, man, I don't know if there's many other places out there that can offer these guys what we do. So I think that's kind of where the uniqueness comes in. I mean, we probably have to educate guys a little bit more than other places because of the uniqueness of the opportunity. But in terms of day to day, like I think we're probably working the same in terms of the evaluation piece and getting out on the road as a lot of programs. Maybe not, maybe probably bigger scope in terms of travel, but yeah, man, that's kind of how we do it.
I think we've talked about this a little bit in the high academic circuit. I think there's a little bit of a misnomer, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you guys are looking, let me take a step back. From an academic perspective, and people have this assumption around the Ivy League that like, well, if I'm a really good student, I can play in the Ivy League, right? Same thing with Navy. I would imagine it's like, just because I want to go into the academy doesn't mean I get to play there. You guys start with, are you a good enough baseball player to move the needle at the Naval Academy? And then the conversation becomes, are you a fit for this place? Is this place a fit for you? Versus the other way around of like, well, I really want to go to the Navy and I happen to play baseball. Like I could probably get a uniform. I think it's actually the other way around. And I think that's a common misperception with high academic schools, also with the military academies. Because the first time we had Chris on here, he hadn't just gotten the job, but we hadn't really talked to him much about it. And one of the things that he said is you'd be surprised how many kids we recruit who never had the military on their list in any capacity, whether it was Air Force or Navy or Army, and that they didn't know the opportunity that was there and what being a part of a service academy gives you, not only in the short term from a baseball perspective, but the long term bonus of being associated with that when you get out into the professional world, whether you're going to be in the military for 20 years or you're going to serve one tour and you're going to be out, when you're 28, 29 years old. And that was interesting for me because even going into this, knowing as much as I think I know about college baseball, that was something I hadn't really thought that much about. And do you guys find that true in Navy, that a lot of guys you recruit?
I think for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong, like that there's tons of guys that want to do it, that have grown up wanting to do it, that have family members that have done it. That's kind of their track. And there are guys on our field that are in our program that help us win right now that were those guys. For sure. So that's not necessarily like that's definitely not something we discard. It certainly helps if they have like a baseline interest, if they have a baseline knowledge, if they have, I mean, our game one guy against Army, his brother went here. So, and his dad. So he's like, I mean, he's got a ton of family lineage here, but, to Coach Traz's point and to, what sounds like you guys talked about, I've seen it over 11 years. And I think probably that, that number of recruits that hadn't considered it, as that percentage is probably swayed higher. Like there's more and more guys that that they see the value in what our type of place does. And if it's a situation where, the grades line up and they can get on the field quick, and, maybe they're like a fringe power four guy. But don't get me wrong, man, like we want to recruit the best guys we can. And if we're recruiting against Duke and Northwestern and Michigan and Boston College and, those types of places, like that's good too. So some kids will be open to it that you might not expect. And, like to your earlier point, I think that's kind of on a case by case, but it's certainly the way we need to go about it to win at a high level. It's got to be recruit the very best guys you can, sell the place. It's a tremendous place. It's an easy place to sell. It's an eye-opening place. Like, as long as the service thing isn't a complete, what I tell guys is like, as long as it's not a complete deterrent, like there's no way I'm doing it. It's worth a call. It's worth a visit. It's worth learning about, and some guys really kind of like it fires them up, man. They do some cool stuff. We got guys going to be SEALs. We got guys going to be EODs. We got guys Marines. We got tons of guys that fly. I mean, and even when we had our head coaching turnover not too long ago, like one of the things that I did for our incoming guy, was like, here are the 120 guys that I've recruited or coached in my at the time 9 years here, and this is what they're doing, and this is where they are. And it was kind of a cool exercise for me. Gave me a chance to reconnect with all those guys, but they do some really cool stuff, man. They're out there and they're in it and they're doing it. So
What's it look like for a kid when he first gets there? Like in kind of the day to day within the program and within the academy, like what does that look like for a freshman or even an upperclassman? Because I think I'm always interested in that. Like, what's that day to day look like in terms of being a student at the Naval Academy?
So I mean, I think the transition is probably harder here than most schools. I mean, transitioning into college baseball and the college in general is not easy to begin with. Once they get through that, what's called plebe summer, when they get through that 6-week program where they're basically just taught how to be a midshipman, how things work, what they need to do, protocol, etc. They train physically. They're sleep deprived. They're challenged in a lot of different ways. So when they get through that and they begin their academic year, there's going to be some differences, but at the end of the day, they're still student athletes. They're still in class. A degree at the Naval Academy requires more credit hours, I think, than any other school in the country. So like their time is used pretty effectively, pretty efficiently. We have to be efficient with like how we practice with them and prioritizing certain things. But at the end of the day, they're in class in the morning. They have some time in the middle of the day to kind of treatment, team meeting stuff, positional meeting stuff, film review. Hitters can come see me during that window. And then they're in class in the afternoon and they're in practice and, after that. And then they're back in the hall and study. And it's, it's going to be more, it's going to be more regimented than other places. Like some of the freedom is not as, like it is elsewhere, but they're also out at the ballpark a lot. They can go on and off the yard. So their day to day, like some of the differences, the military training stuff in the summer is always, is going to be different. They're working some of that like professional training stuff into the day. They're kind of working with that schedule. Now we're actually in a transition period that they're trying to kind of find ways to integrate some of that training stuff into their academic day without impacting too much of the for us, Division I sports, and there's 36 of them at Navy. We still need to practice. We still need to get better. There's still an expectation to win. So they're what I usually say is once the freshmen get through their freshman fall, like around that time, they're they figured it out. And there's some growing pains in there for sure, but they figured it out.
What are some of those growing pains? Like, what are the things that you find that guys need to figure out in order to kind of get past that point where they can settle in and be comfortable? I imagine it's not terribly different than just a general athlete. And we talk about this a lot today, and you hit it at the beginning. Like the transition to college athletics is not an easy one, and that first fall is always tough. What do you see from your guys that they usually kind of need to figure out?
Time management for sure. I mean, no place is gonna put you through the ringer in that regard. More than here. Like they have to learn to manage time. They have to learn to prioritize. They have to learn to multitask. They have to learn to some extent how to compartmentalize. And one thing Coach Rustano talks about is like, when they get out to our field, like it is baseball time, man. And we're, that's got to be the window that they operate in. And they may be tired. They may be gassed out from exams. They may have had a watch until 4 a.m. That's certainly going to be like a unique thing. But they have to find a way to kind of just go forward. And I think one of the things that, that you kind of have to learn with our guys too, is like sometimes, the idea of like, are they just trying to get to the next thing? Are they just trying to endure and get to the next benchmark in turn, as opposed to like excelling? And I don't think any of those guys, certainly our guys, ever think that way, but I think sometimes they just got to get, they just want to get to the next evolution. And, that's something out here that we're not, we probably won't accept. Like we need their best. We have to have their best if we, want to be the team and the program and truthfully give these guys the experience that they want, because the experience, whether you like it or not, like is largely impacted by success. So, they figure out pretty quick, like what it takes to excel day to day. And that includes the classroom, and that includes being able to like handle those challenges and those stressors and those things that create that anxiety. They need to figure it out quick. And I will tell you, like the vast majority do. I was thinking about this on my ride to the field just now, like, how many guys have I seen leave the program? And it's not many. And even the guys that may, trickle out, stay here. Like you don't want to leave a place like this. It's certainly the opportunity is a special one and a unique one, and you don't want to give that up, with or without baseball sometimes. So, but yeah, man, it's a unique thing for sure.
Yeah, I think the time management piece I think it goes across any level, any sport in college athletics, not just baseball, not just the Division I level, but understanding that now you don't have somebody looking over your shoulder all the time. You got to be accountable to be where you're supposed to be able to put your best foot forward in those moments. And my experience, Keith would probably echo the same sentiment, is that the guys who figure out that quickly can usually settle in and figure out how good they can be in all facets of it, right? Academics, baseball, social life. The guys who come in and it's just a blur of, I just need to get to where I'm supposed to be, and that's the only thing they're concerned with, and they haven't been able to settle in. It usually doesn't show up as much as it should on the baseball field. They're usually not doing quite as well as they should in the classroom, because it's a little bit of a cluster trying to figure out how to navigate it all. And it's something that we talk about a lot with the guys that we work with. We talk about it a lot on the podcast here, is understanding that when you get there, you got way more stuff that you need to take care of than you probably ever had to do when you were in high school, and you don't have anybody there who's going to hold your hand to do it. And I think that that can be a big adjustment. It sounds like it's the same in Navy.
No doubt. No doubt. And, for some guys, it's like drinking out of a fire hose, man. And then for other guys, like they're locked in from day one. And I 100% agree with that idea of, the guys that figure it out quicker undoubtedly are getting to their peak performance more often, and they perform better out here. And I think some of that stuff that that can be roadblocks for them to be as good as they can be, like when that stuff is removed, without a doubt. And I'm not saying they have to be 4.0 students. We have some of those. We have guys that are far below that. Either way, you're still looking at like, a 3.0 or a 2.5 GPA, but they're getting it done and they know what they need to be doing, and they get where they need to be. Those guys generally will be kind of freed up to perform better when they're down here. No doubt. That is 100% a valid point. And something we see here for sure.
On the hitting side, I want to pick your brain on this. You've been coaching hitters, evaluating hitters for a long time. What are some of the things that you key in on when you go to evaluate a hitter? I think we get caught up in this age of metrics and short posts on Twitter and exit velos and stuff. When you go to a game, when you're evaluating a guy to figure out, is he a guy who can compete at the level you need him to compete at? What are some of the things that you're really focusing in on that clue you into this guy's kind of got what it takes?
I think, the baseline level is like, is this tool set and the skill set kind of a match for what we're looking for, whether it be size, speed. Is it more of a thump guy? Are we looking for a little bit more of an action guy? I guess the big thing for me is like, does he perform? And the guys that, as simple as that sounds, like if you think about like all the games you guys have been at or recruited or gone and seen, how many times do you go out and see a 4-for-4 or a 3-for-4, like barrel. The frequency with which they do that, I think, speaks volumes. It's also kind of like, to me, it's that's as easy as evaluating maybe like the arm strength. Like everybody wants to recruit a guy that's 92 to 95, and that's kind of an easy evaluation. The repetition of getting off good swings. Do they get off their A swing when they go? How often are they fooled? I think we're like in an age where like sometimes we have to make decisions with very little evaluation time. Like, I mean, I was even talking to Costi about this not too long, maybe a couple years ago, right before he, left here. But, back then, like you were seeing a kid play like Legion baseball. Like you could see him Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You could see him play 5, 6, 7 times. Sometimes we're seeing guys and we may get 2 at-bats in a game at Lake Point. And we try to go back and see that guy again. And, the sheer volume of like performance. So, I guess at a real basic level, without getting like into the weeds of like, what am I looking at in the swing? The performance matters. And I know that sounds like super basic, but like, that's really a big one. Where he hits in the lineup, how he gets out of the box, the frequency with which he gets fooled. does he get good swings off even when he misses? And again, it's not, I still think like there's truth to like hitters hit. So, is this a guy that has a history of being successful? And, instead of looking at maybe like the physicality or the exit velo or the metric, which I certainly think has value, I'm more so trying to find guys that can play offense, that aren't just like, that don't need a swing coach. They need to go hit, and I think sometimes that's probably tougher to find than like the kid that just can pop off a 110 exit velo or a 105 exit velo. And, you go to futures games and you watch Team Georgia or Team Florida, man, like every single one of those dudes, like they're they can move the barrel. Seeing them play, that's kind of like where you kind of see some guys separate,
It is super basic, but I think that there's a lot of truth and value in having this conversation, because even though it's as obvious as it sounds, right? Like, how well does he perform in game? Like, that's what actually matters. A, to get you recruited, but B, to also get you burned when you get to college. Because we've all coached kids who don't have super high exit velos and, aren't going to get up there and, jump the yard 12, 13, 14 times a year, but you look up and they hit 370 and are a big piece of your offense because they can control the barrel, they're always on it, and they're always taking really good at bats. And I think that we're in an age now where younger kids, and especially, I don't necessarily know if it's going to get better anytime soon, because with the rule changes and not being able to talk to anybody before their junior year and all the like, a lot of these kids are relying on the PBRs and the perfect games and the name it organization to tweet out what they're doing. And they want it tweeted out that they had a 99 exit velo as a 2028. But as coaches, we're looking at it like, that's great. And Billy Soleno said this on our podcast. We bring it up all the time. Like, we don't play this game in a carnival. Like, what does that really mean? Like, it's awesome. You can move the barrel a little bit, but can you do it in game? Can you do it against velo? Can you do it against off speed stuff that is sliding out of the zone? Like, are you going to get fooled a lot? What's your whiff rate? What are all those things? Like, all of that has to come into play. So yes, like it does. It can come off as a cop-out answer, and it's not. I don't believe it is at all. At the very basic level, like, you still have to go perform. And I was going through a couple things today because I was looking some stuff up from some showcases. When you're looking at indoor TrackMan reports, and there's kids that are 70-80% fly ball with a max travel velo off of TrackMan at like 340. It's like, what? Like, you're an out. You're in DP and you're just an out every time. Like, you don't have the strength to drive the ball out of the yard, and you maybe hit a home run if you go pull side. Like, maybe, like, that's not getting out in left, right, center gap or dead center. Like, it's just an out in college. And I think some people lose, like, especially in the recruiting process, people forget the aspect of like, your metrics are a piece of the puzzle. Yeah, you can have great metrics. I've seen plenty of people who can generate some bat speed off of a tee, who, when they get in the game, look like they're hitting with a rolled up wet newspaper, and can't do it. And those kids generally, you're not going to end up in a really good spot, because when you do get in game and the lights are on, that's when it matters. It's the same thing defensively. It's the same thing pitching wise. You can go be we're seeing it. You can go be 96, 98, but if you can't command the zone, go pitch at a 12, man. You're probably not going to toe the rubber all that much. And
I would even say that there's an element too where for us, where we play, that we play a ton of home games. The ballpark plays huge. The gaps are enormous. The 340-foot fly ball, man, like you said it. That's not helping us create offense.
Nope.
So in terms of like the type of player or the type of swing that we may look to recruit, like that's absolutely a factor.
Well, Andy talks about this a lot too. Is like high school kids generally, when you get to college, you're functioning within an offense. Like you're not the dude anymore. Generally speaking, when you get to college, like when we go recruit, like yeah, generally we're watching 1 through 4, 5-ish in the lineup. But that 1 through 4 in that lineup, you're not going to be a 1 through 4 guy the second you set foot on campus. Like you might be a 7, 8, 9 guy depending on what you do, and you like you're going to be asked to do other things that you might not generally have been able to do in the past. Like you might all of a sudden find yourself in the 9 hole and they're like, hey man, like you're a bunt guy as a freshman. Like we need you to move runners along. We need you to hit behind runners. Like you don't have the strength to drive it out of the yard or into the gaps. And we play in a big yard, so we ain't losing a lot of balls. Like got to be able to hit line drives, and we play on turf, so maybe we can scoot some through on the ground too. Well, the fly balls ain't going to play here, and
my kid's 14, and I mean the stuff that I talk about with him, and I don't really like push anything. Ultimately, like I let him drive like how much I coach him, but he's pretty in tune with it, and like the stuff that we talk about is not like the generation of bat speed. Like it's pitch select, it's zone command, it's ability to use the whole field, the bat speed piece, and like the swing mechanic stuff. Like yeah, like I'll tell him to feel something or look at this and try to get to this spot, but like man, that development's gonna come much more based on like how he develops physically. And like there's some baseline stuff that like you want to be able to do as a hitter in terms of like how your body works, but like when I'm with him in the cage, it's like how do we handle multiple pitch looks? How do we handle spin? How do we what's our adjustability like? So like as it pertains to your earlier question, like those are all things that I think show up like in game. They don't necessarily show up in a showcase environment. And I absolutely appreciate the video, and we want the video, and we want the big exit velo, and that may be kind of the thing that gets me to the ballpark to see you. And all of those avenues to do that, whether it's perfect game or PBR or you name it, those are absolutely good in terms of getting kids exposure. But like you said, like that might be just what gets us in the door, and from there it's like how consistently does the kid perform?
Yeah, the playing offense. Like, can you play offense? I love that term because I just think that when you get to college, a collection of 9 good hitters doesn't necessarily make a really effective offense. Like, yeah, it'd be great to have a bunch of studs hitting 1 through 9. Makes it really hard to get through a lineup, and that's obviously great, but guys need to take on certain roles. They need to understand things situationally. They need to understand pitch mix. And you also mentioned, and I always thought of myself this way, is like I wasn't a swing coach. I was an offensive coach. Like I wasn't a huge mechanics guy. Like when you get to college, you're there because you do some stuff that lines up, and like, yeah, you make some adjustments with guys if they got some glaring holes or some things that need to get tightened up. But I thought you moved the needle as a coach in college more so by teaching kids how to take in a bat, how to recognize patterns, how to understand what a guy's going to do to try to get you out. And I think about it sometimes that there's so much more data available now where you can really dial in going into a weekend on, hey, their Friday night guy, this is what he does. This is what he does well. This is what he doesn't do well. this is how he's going to pitch guys in certain situations and give that information. So when they go up to the plate, we're not worried about mechanics. We're worried about locking in on, hey, this guy really has trouble throwing that breaking ball for a strike, and he has trouble getting the ball arm side. So this is where our eyes are going to be set during an at bat, and like really understanding. I think that that's where the difference is between a lot of college coaches and a lot of guys who teach swings is that they're getting into the nitty gritty of how do you play offense versus how do you swing a bat. And I think in college, how you play offense is ultimately what you get judged on, not how pretty your swing looks.
And I mean, the vast majority, like you said, I mean, the vast majority, if you're a Division I player, like by and large, you're probably, and I shouldn't even, I'll take that out. If you're playing in college, in any case, in any capacity, you probably have a baseline skill set, to swing the bat. I think, tons of approach stuff, tons of visualization stuff. Can you control your thought process in the box? Like I talked to my 14-year-old about that. And that comes from a place, honestly, and I mean, you can feel free to fact check this if you want, but like it was a terrible the mental game for me was very bad, and it was very, very difficult. I think I put a lot of like stock in like how guys like manage their thought process. We still have a young team here. Like we're still learning, that offensive component, and we're still teaching that like a lot. That's still stuff that comes up. I mean, I think I put together something not too long ago for our guys that was just like, hey man, like here's how you develop a routine. Here's how you process a scouting report. Here's when you want to process it, because I don't want them processing that in the on-deck circle. Like that's got to happen beforehand. I think there's a huge difference between like sitting on pitches and having some intuition and game feel and guessing. Being able to look to a spot. The pitch recognition piece, like I've obviously the more at bats, the better. I think maybe, I could see some value and it's probably coming not too far down the pike. Like some, I've thought about visual training, and like you talk about how goalies in the NHL like train reaction time. We don't use any of it now, but I could see like that being something that could have some value. But again, like you kind of hit on it, like there'll be discussions about barrel plane and how their body is working, and to try to get them like as efficient as they can. But ultimately, like you're talking about, you said it, coaching offense, or coaching hitting versus coaching the swing. But I think that's like an ever developing thing. I know Matt down at Maryland is doing some really interesting stuff with, with some of the body movement stuff that I think is super interesting, and kind of finding a way to be as efficient of a mover as you can. And ultimately, like that's what hitting is. It's pitch recognition, and it's being efficient to contact. So I mean, it's, as much as I've always felt like, that we're not reinventing the wheel, there's still a lot of stuff out there that like I think we can continue to get better and still maintain like the basic, the things we know work still work. The things that I was being taught when I was playing at Clemson 25 years ago, those things are still things that come out of my mouth, like when I talk with our hitters. So, as much as it's evolving, like I still think that there's like some baseline stuff that's always going to be, those are going to be like anchors. They're going to be bench posts that like you have to be able to do these things. There have been years where I've given guys like, hey, these are the absolutes, and like you have to be able to execute these things. And how I teach them and coach them and talk to them, like that's evolved over time as well, because players are different now than they were 20 years ago. So yeah, that's definitely a factor.
When you go check a guy out, what are some of the things that are a little bit less tangible, right? Like less tools based, not just speaking from like a hitting perspective, but just in general. What are some things that kind of fire you up and clue you into like that's a dude that I'm interested in? And I ask it on the positive side because we had a guy on earlier a while back that talked about green flags versus red flags, and like it's easy to go to like this is the stuff that I don't like, but what are some of the things that fire you up when you go watch a guy play?
But I mean, my biggest thing is like the motor, like the energy level. Like, does the guy play with a little bit of juice? And like you talk about, every coach will say it, every coach will believe it. Like, we're not coaching effort. We're not coaching energy. That should be a given. I think it's easy probably to like fall into maybe like those, how does he run on and off the field? Like, okay, obvious. How does he play catch? How's he move during pregame? How does he interact with his teammates? How does he interact with his parents? Like, those things are all 100% valuable. But I kind of go back to like where I'm at now. Those things are kind of like, they're already built into the cake, man. They're already in the recipe. I think the biggest kind of factor is like the energy, the juice. Like, does the guy play with some motor? And like, we were fortunate enough to have a shortstop that just graduated last year that like, I mean, that dude didn't miss a single game his entire collegiate career. I don't know if that dude missed a practice. And we were fortunate enough to have a third baseman that did the same thing. But like, the motor was always there. The energy was always there. It didn't always mean that he was going to have the best game of his life, but like, you could count on it, and that's something that came up. I think, some of our younger guys we were in the lobby talking about something and they asked about him. And that was the thing that like I brought up the most, was like, I knew he'd show up. I knew he'd have some juice, even if he was, again, he up till 2 studying and a watch till 4, like just found a way to play with some energy. And like that translates to success, man. I mean, no doubt. The flip side of that is really, you talk about green flags and red flags, like that's a big one in terms of being able to, I think even more so here, because their energy level can be compromised. Sometimes they are sleep deprived, and like that one thing, really important. And the other one I would say is like game feel. And I think, the way travel baseball has evolved and the way like the showcase thing has kind of evolved over time, I think it's more rare for me to see guys that really know how to run the bases. They probably get fired up about something crazy on the bases with our current players at least once a game, where like the read was kind of funky. And I think that's part of the game that maybe we don't see as much. So when it does show up, when I do go out and see a guy and like he's getting a dirt ball read, or he goes first to third, he doesn't come off the gas on his turn, creates pressure. Like, the creation of pressure as an offensive player is like, that's a big one. Even the single, like how he gets out of the box on a single, like on just I'm not talking like split gap, but if he does split one, is he thinking about third base and not second? If he hits a ground ball in the 5-6 hole, like, is there a threat for him to extend because of how he got out of the box in the first 15 feet? Those are kind of some of the things I think that, to your question, I think that stand out. And I think it all comes back to like the motor and the juice, and does the kid want to play, you know? So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Watching dudes come to a screeching halt on that ball that gets through the 5-6 hole because they're just tearing around first base, they used to fire me up. Because like you don't have to coach that kid to play hard.
Nope.
Like,
No, no.
you know that kid's going to show up and get it done. And to your point, the guys who show up like that, you're going to get a good effort out of them. Like you trust them. And I think trust is a huge part of how guys get into the lineup is like, I know what I'm going to get out of you, right? I don't have to
Yeah.
worry that on a Sunday, after you've gone 0 for 3, that fourth at bat's going to be trash, or the effort you're going to give in that at bat isn't going to be what it needs to be, because I've seen you do it so many times. I've seen you do it in high school. I've seen you do it in practice. And like guys who, it's usually not an act when guys play like that. I think,
No, no.
they're not pulling the wool over your eyes and playing hard because you're there. Like guys who play like that all the time.
No
And
doubt.
it's an interesting thing to watch college baseball more and more. And there aren't very many good teams that don't have a full lineup of guys who play like that. Right? It's not the big leagues where Juan Soto can hit a single through the 4 hole and he's going to come to first base and barely get around. It's a different game. Like we don't.
No doubt.
College baseball isn't big leagues. You can't assume anything because guys make mistakes, and the dudes who tear around the bases and play with that kind of motor, I think they're game changers, and I think I got to imagine you guys don't have to worry about it quite as much at Navy, but like those guys can change cultures too, because then
100%.
everybody's got to fall into line. They're like, all right, our best player is doing that. Well, I should probably do that too.
No doubt. And I think even when Coach Rostano got here, we really kind of, one of his big things is, how they run the bases. And like, I think he and we did a really good job at like taking the fear out, and especially in the fall, just letting them be, letting them take extra bags. Our other assistant, Coach Pavs, he brought something from, he spent a ton of time with in the Angels organization, and like he told me one time, he's like, for an entire spring training, like we had to go first to third on every single ball, on every ball. We had to go, unless it was a straight up like one hop, hit me in the chest. That was the only one you could come off the gas. And like, I think guys, that's part of it, where like, okay, if we see that in high school a little bit, and he has a little bit of that fearlessness, and he's in tune enough to like recognize you can go first to third on a ball that squeaks up the middle. You can go first to third. Certainly on a ball that takes the left fielder to his left. I think if they have a baseline of like a willingness to do that, you get a shot to like kind of unleash them a little bit when they get here, and then they start to figure out like, man, I really can do that. I can challenge these. I can create pressure, and again, like that's the second time I've brought up that point, but like the ability to create pressure that's a huge component of any offense, for sure. Like with it, maybe like the biggest component. There were times that I tracked. Everybody tracks, quality at bats, and we can find more and more data about pitch selection and chase rates, and what are they swinging at, and where their success is, and what balls they handle better than others. But like, there were years that I tracked like zero pressure outs. Like, how many times did you get in the box and create no pressure? And I came up with some ridiculous, like some scoring thing, like the pop up versus the weak contact ground ball versus the punch. Like, how are you finding ways to apply pressure? And the speed tool's obviously the most, that's the most obvious one, but it's not the only one. And even that old adage of like, you don't have to be fast to be a good base runner. You don't have to have a cannon to be an effective outfielder. Those are kind of things that I think the game clock, like that came up recently, as recent as this weekend, where game clock was off, guy beats out a ground ball, and the impact of that as the game progressed was significant. So, those are things that I think they stand out more now than maybe they did 10 years ago, in terms of like how guys play.
Yeah, the base running piece, I think, is one of the biggest ones that younger kids don't understand how to do when they get to college and how it can actually impact games. And I stole something.
And the bunt.
I stole something from Coach Beretti at Columbia where, in the fall and anytime they practice, whether it's a scrimmage or coach pitch or whatever, you hit a ball in the air, like you have to touch second. Whether or not you're out safe, doesn't matter. Like you have to go to second. And it's obviously to get guys out of the box super quick and you're always thinking two. And, if you get thrown out and it was a good read, like, they reset it first, whatever it might be, right? Like, but it's I stole it from them, and like it instantly impacts when you get a bunch of guys to do it, all of a sudden like that, it becomes something that can be not necessarily your identity, but all of a sudden guys like they start understanding good risk versus bad risk. And then, you start having those nuanced conversations. Like I smiled when you were like, when the left fielder's going away, like running to his left, like, you can get lost in this, but this is things that like when you get to college, if the outfielder's running away from his throwing arm, like if you're at second base and going to tag and the right fielder is right-handed and he's running into the corner, there's no shot he's throwing you out. Like you can go tag and run to third, and now maybe you have run around first, run around third with one out, like pass ball, wild pitch, sac fly, ground ball. Like there's so many opportunities for you to score one more run, all because it's like, maybe you go against the grain, but it's like, he's running away from his throwing arm. Like it looks like he's going to catch this. Like I can Cadillac this in over to third because there's no shot he's throwing me out. It's little things like that I think people, one, it's not taught, but B, like paying attention and understanding the game and watching it and seeing that stuff, like it can make you a better base runner, which eventually can lead to you paying attention to other things and being in the lineup a little bit more. And like, to your point earlier, like now you have a guy who what you're going to get. Like, if we get him on base, like there's a good chance this kid's going first and third. And, we're going to give ourselves an opportunity to put pressure on defenses and then score runs. And I coached third for a very long time. Like I wheeled everybody because especially in the college game, like it's got to be perfect. How many outfield assists are we getting in the college game on a regular basis? Like it's got to be perfect. The relay throw has to be perfect. The catch, the tag, all of it. It happens so quick. Like take your chances. Obviously there's times where you throw the brakes on, but like some of those 50-50 ones, I'm like, screw it. Like let's, we're tied. If we take the lead here, awesome. If not, like, hey, we're still tied. We got to run around second base and, whatever, but I think sometimes like it's, when Andy's talking about this with William and Mary, they didn't even have a stop sign. Like it was just assumed that you were scoring unless you or they didn't have a send sign, excuse me. Like you were just going. They were like, they would throw the brakes on if need be, but like, you're scoring. So run hard and that's what we're going to do.
Hey, that's something we talked about, and I saw that. I want to say I talked to like Nick at Clemson. Obviously was at Michigan. Because I noticed it when they were in Omaha, and like guys were coming around and he was not moving. And the only movement that they would get would be like the stop sign. We haven't necessarily adopted that here, but like I like it I like what it creates in terms of like the intent to score. And the intent to like you're going, it's almost like that, it's like the old, you still hear this, is still valid, like the yes, 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 no thing in terms of getting your swing off. Like I'm scoring, I'm going until I see the hands, until I see a movement. So like in theory, I think, I really like it in the sense that like Andy brought it up before, you've talked about it, like there is like a development of culture there that starts to permeate when guys start to, when guys start to do that and play. And ultimately, like they're trending towards playing the game at a higher level when they're starting to be able to do that.
I think the other thing too, and Andy can talk to it more, but I think the other thing too is sometimes you can catch people sleeping or create more chaos from the standpoint of like somebody might be keying in on you in the third base box, like either wheeling or holding up. And if you're just standing there doing nothing, like they're like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like there's baseball happening here. And like you can like you might catch people unprepared and create that more chaos because they don't know. They're looking to see you like, oh, cut, or no, 4-4-4-4-4, and you're not doing anything. It's like, I don't know what's going on over here. Like, should we cut this ball? I'm like, I don't know. Andy did it more than me, but I would imagine like you probably end up with some balls that get cut that don't need to get cut, and it's just a free run.
I mean, it bit us a couple weekends back, like super aggressive wheel, and like our shortstop came up, and it was like I don't think he was expecting the guy to go. Like, I don't think, and that little clutch, like, probably cost us a step or two. Like you said, within reason and game situation will dictate that for sure. And the personnel dictates that for sure. But, yeah, man, I mean, when you talk about just trying to create that culture of pressure offensively, like all of that plays into it. I brought up the bunting piece. It was with, like my kid's 14U team, and they're all 8th graders, and go and like, talk to them about hitting or whatever. And, like I brought up bunting, I brought up base running, I brought up situational hitting. The things that like I probably, like when I look back on game notes or when I look back on, when I go back through the film, some of the bigger points of contention are honestly reads at second base and situational hitting. Those are usually ones that seem to come up on a very regular clip.
Yeah, the situational stuff is always, I think that it gets lost in high school because so much is driven by a few players, and often the margins aren't very thin. But in college, getting the ball in play with 2 strikes, you look at the basic numbers, like over the course of the season, if you get the ball in play instead of striking out, you're going to get some guys on base. And like over the course of a weekend, like you guys played 2 1-run games and a 2-run game. Like one this past weekend against Army, a guy getting a ball in play with 2 outs and him extending an inning, maybe he gets into scoring position and you get a good swing off. Like that can be the whole series. That can be the difference between you winning a series and not winning a series, but it doesn't usually get viewed like that because some of it's because of how the big leagues play. Because to be honest, a ball in play in the big leagues is most of the time it's an out if it hits somebody's glove. In college, that's not the case. Like you can create that chaos, but yeah, it's such a big part of playing offense at the college level. Like, can you get the guy from second base to third base with nobody out, without sacrificing aggressiveness, like with a legitimate approach that like, hey, we're gonna at all costs here, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna pound this ball to the backside of the field, and being willing to stick with that approach because then, hey, if I hit something hard, maybe we score him. But worst case scenario, the next guy's gonna have a chance to drive him in. It just adds up, and it doesn't always show up in one inning, but over the course of a year, over the course of a series, like it chips away at things. And it's hard to teach because most guys aren't. I shouldn't say it's hard to teach, but you find yourself having to teach it because it's not an emphasis at the younger levels, right? And it's not a knock on the younger levels. It's just they don't play the game the way college baseball is played, and a lot of guys have to learn how to do that stuff when they get to college.
No doubt. And I mean, if I just obviously short memory here, but like huge turning point in a game 2 that we lost was like a hustle play. Extended an inning, the noose tightens a little bit. Like man, that can absolutely, when you talk about like, certainly for us, whenever we play those guys, like everything's heightened. Um, there's absolutely like an added pressure and environment, and it is a really unique thing to be part of. Like, there's not many other rivalries, and I've been part of some pretty awesome ones, but like, there's something different about like that application of pressure in games that are going to be decided. That margin is going to be very thin, and I think that's something that that we always have to have as part of our offensive identity. Like, it has to be there. It's certainly here. Like, and again, without belaboring the point, but not an easy place to leave the yard. If you score in bunches, it's usually driven by like, are we playing on a line? Are we extending? Are we creating pressure? How much pressure are we able to apply? And that's it, man. I mean, that's a huge, huge, huge part of it.
But I think it's also the game though, which is why this game is like, in leaving coaching in 22, like one of the biggest things I miss is the in-game strategy. Cause it's like, you don't know what play in a game is going to win or lose you that game and potentially the series. And like, you can go back and look at the end and, you can generally start to pinpoint them, but like, that's like that guy going first to third could be the difference between you going up one or staying tied and, throwing a ball away or whatever it might, like those things, they add up over the course of a season. And generally, I mean, it's like 51 or 52% of your games are going to be one-run games in college baseball. Like the margins are so thin in order to be good. And those types of like those things that, it sounds like people are going to listen to this and be like, this is pretty nuanced, but it's fairly straightforward. Like these are just things that you need to be able to do in order to be able to play and have success at the next level. And I think that it's those things that it's little things like this that don't necessarily get taught at lower levels, and not because for lack of knowledge or anything. I just don't think there's the time, like the sheer amount of time it takes to go over this stuff. Like situational baseball in college is so nuanced. Like, you're going to see something on a field over the course of a weekend that you may have only seen once in your life or never before. And it's like, oh, I've been around this game for 30 something years. I've never seen that, or I've only seen it once, and but I think like the more that you can get better at, taking extra bases and being able to make plays. And, we've talked about this before on here, and, Matt Hobbs told a great story about a kid who, his name escapes me right now, but a second baseman who, worked his way into the lineup for Arkansas solely based off of defense. And, it's something that I think that in today's game gets lost, where you have to actually go play defense too. You can't just hit. You have to be able to defend the baseball in order to be able to find yourself on the field. And I think the lowest hanging fruit for some guys is being able to defend, because you're going to get into these tight one-run games. And it's like, well, he might only come up once in the back half of this game. Like, I can live with one at bat because he's going to make every play. And, all of a sudden, like you string together 2, 3, 4 at bats over the course of a couple of games. And it's like, hey, why don't we run out Joey in this midweek and see what we got? And next thing you know, like you might be a guy who's challenging for a lot more burn solely because you're able to defend the baseball. And, I think a lot of this, like it sounds very basic, but it's hard to do. That consistency of being able to show up and do it every day. But like, the being able to defend the baseball to me, I think it's always been, I couldn't hit in college. I was as mediocre came at the Division I level, but I could defend. And that's why I played, and it's always been a thing where like, hey, you can find yourself in the lineup if you can go defend the baseball. And I feel like it's something that we're moving away from because it's not sexy to post unless you have like some sick backhand play in the hole and you're a shortstop and throw a guy out. But being able to defend at a high rate is a huge piece of finding success in college, both as an individual and at the team level.
Yeah, and I also think I just lost lights. Hold on, fellas. There we go. I also think that that's another kind of byproduct of not seeing a guy numerous times. Like if you go to see a shortstop, how many chances are you really seeing? And just the way things have evolved. Before I talked about our previous head coach, and he had done it for 30 years, and it was like you see a guy because he's local and you can see him 10 times, and if he's a shortstop, you probably see him handle the ball a heck of a lot more than you do over a 5-day tournament. If you're lucky enough to see a guy, like there are tons of guys that you might get one eval, and we try to do it where if I see a guy, then our other assistant goes and sees him, and we're trying to cross-check each other, but you're not seeing guys with regularity to see if that's something, and again, I would consider that a tool that they have, because there's just not, unless you're really sitting on a guy, and I'm thinking about, some of the guys in our program, and, maybe some of the ones that I think are either the better players now, or certainly some of the younger guys, one of our younger guys, but that was a kid that I probably saw 6 times. I just kept going back. And part of that was driven by wanting that kid in the program, and wanting to, obviously make sure that he knew his importance in our recruiting scope, but you also got to see him do it a ton. And that was, I think that limits the likelihood of missing on guys. And we all miss, everybody misses. I think the roster restrictions are probably going to make that stuff a little bit more. That's going to be more of you can't, if you're not able to bring in as many guys, you may not hit on as many. And then, there's obviously value in numbers. But I've never been in a program where, you could afford to miss a whole lot. You know what I mean? And then you look up 3 years down the road, and man, that class wasn't great. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how that evolves, where certainly if we're capped in the fall, before we get on the field in the fall, and then we have to finalize rosters as we get into December, I think that evaluation piece is going to be amplified. And even as I talk through it now, I think the value of seeing guys repeatedly is going to be even more, important.
Yeah, I think it's going to be huge. You're going to go from, we had unlimited rosters for the last 4 or 5 years in the fall. And then you don't have to be at 40 until a week before the season starts. So you could pretty much, you could really just roll in as many guys as you want and just kind of let it shake out and take your best 40 and roll from there. Whereas if it's going to be 38 and then 34, and I'm glad you said it, because Andy and I say it on here all the time. We're not perfect from a recruiting standpoint. You miss. It's coaches have missed forever. And, it's certainly going to change things on how, which is why, and this is a longer conversation we have to get into, why the portal is probably going to be a little bit more utilized at the upper ends of college baseball, because they have way more data and video and things that they can go to be able to plug some holes and go from there.
And you can recruit proven talent.
Correct.
At the college level.
The hyperbole that you see on Twitter of high school baseball's dead and blah, blah, blah. You can't get into the portal without having first gone to college. You can't commit to the portal. Like, that's not a thing. You
Right.
can't just be
Right.
like, hey, I'm throwing, I'm happy, hashtag thank God I'm blessed to be able to commit to the transfer portal. Like, no, you have to go to a college first before you can even go there. And, but I think from a high school standpoint, like there's going to be more due diligence done on kids than maybe there has been in the last 4 or 5 years that it's gotten away from at the Division I level, to kind of say like, hey, like what am I getting out of this kid, and what type of player is he? Is he going to fit into our program? Because I don't have 6, 7, 8, 9 extra slots to just take a flyer on somebody and see what happens. Like, this guy's got to be able to come in and be able to compete and play, potentially play multiple positions, things of that nature, to be able to really compete in our program.
No doubt. And like, I think the numbers, can kind of cheapen the evaluation process, because, you can just kind of like hope or dream on a guy, and well, hey, if he figures this out, great, and he might be okay. But if he doesn't, then he's, there's attrition, and he probably phases out and he's in the portal. Or, now I don't think it's going to be a tremendous change for us per se, because we've never really had the leeway to kind of work in that model. We've had a pretty finite number from certainly from the time I've been here. So from an impact standpoint for us, I don't know if that's going to change a whole lot, because the margin for error, is kind of the same. And I think the other thing that you pointed out in terms of like the misses and maybe the quote mistakes is like, for us, we never know how a guy's really going to handle the transition to an academy. You can project the guys that you think are gonna handle it. But there have been just as many dudes that, like, coming into like their freshman year, I'm like, that guy's going to be fine. He's not going to have any issues. I'm worried about this guy. I don't know if he's going to be able to handle it. And then it's like the complete opposite. Like, the dude you thought was going to be rock solid is fighting it. And the dude that you thought would be struggling a little bit figured it out, no trouble. And like, that's a variable that, like, I've been here over a decade. I still don't know the recipe. Like, I couldn't tell you, like, how to determine if a guy's really going to be able to do it. I mean, yes, like I said, most 99% of our guys check the character box. Like, there's no telling how they're going to be when they're kind of put into the environment and have to navigate it. So
it really is such a coin flip, and you try to get it right, and you don't always know until they get into the environment that they have to compete in, right? And like, we've talked about this, when you get to college, most of your competition's in your own dugout, and that alone is a huge change for guys.
for sure.
And like like you talked about how you guys kind of set the tone for how you try to create chaos and be difficult to play against offensively. You do it with a practice environment. Most kids have never practiced the way that you're required to practice in college baseball. And that's a huge eye opener the first time you step into like a full practice where everything's scheduled down to the minute, and there's very specific goals that you're trying to accomplish in certain windows. There's an expectation for energy, there's an expectation for execution. And like, the first practice that a kid goes to that's the case, some of those guys, like, you can see it in their face, like, what is this? This isn't baseball. And then stack on to, the social life and classwork and all that. But like, that step into that first, like, full on practice can be quite the eye opening experience for a new kid. And you don't know how they're going to react until you get them in there. Most kids, takes them a little bit of time to figure it out, but there's some guys who never quite settle in, and there's some guys it takes them a week and like now I know exactly what I need to do. I can relax and I'm good and I can go and play.
No, I mean, and again, like I still remember two things when I showed up at Clemson and I was 17. And I remember like the first, like you said, the first full practice and like that being kind of jarring. And I remember the first lift and it was like, whoa, everybody performs. Everybody, like just the intensity with which everything was done. And again, like that was a privilege to be at that place, at that time and see it done at that level. But it's a jarring thing, and it's certainly jarring for our guys too, for sure.
All right. Don't want to keep you too long. We've been at this for like an hour and a half, but before we part ways, can you give some advice to players and parents about some advice on how to go through the recruiting process, or some tips, some things for them to think about as they try to navigate the ever evolving complex environment that we're currently existing in when it comes to college baseball recruiting?
I do think that like my perspective is certainly going to be I'm probably about to enter it from like a parent side. And obviously my perspective on that is going to be far different than maybe my son's teammates. In terms of, yeah, I kind of think about it, with regard to my own kid and like what I tell him. Some of this is going to be pretty cliche, some of it may not. I do think with like the current landscape as it is, I think it's probably the hardest time. I don't think this is probably agreed upon across the board, but maybe the hardest time ever to get into Division I baseball as a high school player. Obviously having a feel for like keeping doors open, whether that's a D3, whether that's a JUCO, whether that's NAIA, whatever doors may be open. Like there's so many more paths to Division I baseball than there used to be. You see teams in regionals and super regionals that like have plugged holes with really accomplished Division III players. I see it more and more. We see more guys, obviously, with with grad transfers and guys that can, that have found their way to Division I programs, maybe via a different path. And I think, a lot of kids, my own included, you grow up and I want to play in the ACC or I want to play in the SEC. And like, that's great. And of course, and I'm a little hypocritical saying that because of where I did go. But I also think that like having an open mind, having like a realistic outlook on, and hopefully having some people around you, whether they're coaches, whether they're advisors, whether they're, guys that run programs like that, at least can be like realistic with people as to like the skill set. I don't know how much like people understand how difficult it is to get on a Division I field. Or any college field for that matter. Like, and I mean that, but like opening as many doors as possible is a huge one. Very cliche, but like the academic piece 100% plays into that. And like, can you get academic money? Our guys, their opportunities here, like that has to be there. So they don't have an opportunity at the United States Naval Academy unless they've checked that box. So like how you perform outside of baseball is part of the recipe to get to where you want to go. The academic piece, the extracurricular piece, the specialization that's kind of occurred certainly in the last 10, 20 years, man, I still think that there's value in multi-sport athletes. The private lesson thing and like the individual instructor thing, and those are good, and most work is good work, but man, like it fires me up when I recruit a kid and he's a linebacker, or he's a quarterback, or he's a hockey guy, or he's a point guard, and he finds ways to compete outside of the realm of just baseball. And again, like, that's nothing new, although I feel like it's not quite as prevalent now maybe as it was 10 years ago. My own kid was talking about, like, okay, can I play football as he gets into high school, and like, and is basketball still going to be in play, and like, developing athleticism is I mean, that's huge, man. And I don't know if that comes from just doing one thing. And it absolutely can. I'm not saying it can't, but when there are opportunities to get outside of like the athletic comfort zone, I think those are good things. And that would probably be a bit of advice that I would want to impart. And it's still something that matters. Like when I recruit kids, or when you talk to kids, and they'll still be doing their baseball stuff, but I get fired up when a guy's like, if I'm talking to a kid in the fall and he's talking about a state championship in football. So that's still an important thing. And, ultimately, again, just trying to find and kind of be open to avenues that may present themselves. And I think that's fair to say, and you brought this up before, like when you talk to Coach Traz, like, how many guys never thought about a service academy? And you can kind of, that rolls over into like, well, I never thought about going to that place. And that doesn't have to be us. That could be anywhere. Those are keeping those windows open, and then being proactive about how you communicate. When I talk to kids that we have interest in, I want them to feel comfortable communicating with me, and hey, can I, send me updates. How'd you perform last week? It doesn't have to be an essay, but hey, here's a couple of my knocks from last week. I've been swinging it good. I still ask for like stat lines. Like, we want to know how guys perform. If you're hitting 230 in high school, like, it's probably not a guy that's going to be able to do it at our level. So, there's the being proactive and contacting coaches, but kind of having a feel for that. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't need a weekly update. It's certainly, if it's not a guy that we're like, if we're on a guy, like, we're going to talk to him week to week, and we're going to bi-weekly, and we're going to want to know. But like, early in the process, am I getting some information out there? Is there basic academic info there? Is there some basic film that doesn't require me to click 5 different times? Because when you're talking about the influx of thousands of emails, that stuff kind of matters, and how proactive they are, and how open they are to reaching out to any place that they think may be a fit, and kind of putting the time into being like, okay, am I willing to go to school on the West Coast or South? Do I want to stay in a particular region? Is Division I baseball a realistic landing spot for me? Should I set my sights elsewhere? Do I have to get there via a different path? And that's when I think, like, the value of having people around you that can kind of help you navigate that is important. I think, obviously, like, for me, well, that won't be very hard, because I've done it for almost 20 years, and like, can probably point my kid in the right direction. But I mean, to handcuff yourself to like one grouping of schools, where all of those could be kind of reaches athletically is probably not a great idea. And one thing I still remember, even from when I was coaching in high school, and we had a handful of guys that were like, I think we had one Division I arm and a couple guys that probably could have played in college. And then the discussion I had with them was like, you're going to have to decide, like, if the college experience outweighs the baseball experience, how important is it for you to play in college versus how important is it for you, um, to have an experience maybe at a bigger school, and now, the second layer of that discussion is, can I go someplace and maybe develop, and maybe that door opens 2 years down the road. Which is kind of that's a different component that certainly wasn't there when I was coming up. And I was in school kind of as those transfer rules were transitioning from like sitting out, and then it was free. You could transfer and not sit out, and but yeah, kind of having an open mind in terms of like how to get where you want to go, and then doing the things that are going to help you get there, on the field, off the field. I can't remember where I read this. It was recent. Something to the effect of like being in charge of your own development, and you're not just reliant on my hitting coach, or I'm not just reliant on my travel ball coach. Like, I'm finding ways to do things that are going to improve of my own accord. And like, that's still something I talk to, like, I think my kid's on his PS5 too much, for sure. But like, hey man, if you want to play at a high level, and especially now as he's getting closer to high school, like, you better find a way to get out and move. You better find a way to get stronger. You better find a way to get faster. And like, I'm in a situation where I can kind of help facilitate that a little bit, but it doesn't mean you can't otherwise. And hitting the deck and having a mini strength routine in your living room if you have to, or like push-ups or planks or whatever it may be. If it's 10 minutes less on a screen, that could be the difference between you being just a little bit bigger, just a little bit stronger, just a little bit faster. The doors that you'll open, that's kind of on them, for the most part. And I think that the guys, and the parents that kind of understand that, that's an important thing. And like, my kids' teammates, like, they ask me, or their parents will ask me sometimes, and that's kind of the answer I give them.
It's so competitive that I think you bring up two really good points. One is not dismissing schools. And I think that people are guilty of that very frequently, that they've got a like a D1 or boss mentality, but they're getting interest from some really good Division III programs, and they blow those programs off early in the process. And then they're left kind of with an empty bag at the back end of it, because those guys are going to move on. There's so many good players out there. So I think you can do two things at once. Like, you can have that Division I carrot out in front of you and chase that, but you can also entertain, like, hey, these are the schools that are actually paying attention to me right now. And at a certain point, you have to come to terms with the reality of it. They're like, hey, if I've played in front of 20 Division I schools, but none of them are calling me, but I got these 5 or 6 Division III schools that are awesome, maybe I should probably focus some energy there. Like, I think both of those things can be true. And then the other piece is, it's so competitive that you have to find time to do the stuff that's not fun, right? And sometimes lifting weights and doing sprints and doing that kind of stuff isn't fun, but the guys who really care about it and who are really driven to try to play college athletics at any level, they're going to find 30 minutes before school or 30 minutes after practice to go get a lift in, right? And do those little things. And it does come down to accountability to a certain extent. But I think that for the families that are listening, you have to understand that this is a very competitive environment. And if you think it's just going to happen for you by going through the motions, there's not a lot of people, even the best kids, the reason that they're the best is usually because they probably do a lot of extra stuff. They're in the weight room, they're running, they're getting extra swings in, they're finding time to do that stuff. And I think it's important for people to understand that. So I think those are two really, really good takeaways.
And certainly like for anybody outside of like the 1%, like the best, yeah, man, like some guys can roll out of bed and they're gonna they may have that gene. Like their ability level is going to carry them where they need to go. But for the vast majority, like how do you separate? For sure. Like big focal point there for sure.
All right. Well, appreciate you having me on, man. I know you're in the middle of the season, just got off a nice season win against the rival, but really appreciate your time, and obviously best of luck to you guys. As the season goes on, you just started conference play, and I'm sure you're pushing to try to bring that Patriot League title home.
I mean, I'm pumped to come on. I was fired up to hear from you guys, and you guys hooked me up with a premium. I got the St. Patty's Day slot. I got the post Army slot. You got me at a good time, man. Obviously coming off of that was good, and great series, great, two really special places, great programs. Really, really special thing to be part of. And yeah, it's tough, man. I've been friends with Coach Traz for 15 years, and we got to suit up and put it on the line, and a lot of people care about that thing, man. So I appreciate you guys having me on and getting to chat about it a little bit, and wish you guys the best. And you gotta let me know how to my kid was asking how to listen, so I'll hit you guys up after and see how we can track it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate the time. Obviously, best of luck, and I'm sure we'll catch up with you here at some point here soon. Probably cross paths this summer, hopefully.
Awesome, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.